I'll talk a little bit about the new subscription model, which is an important development here at the Transparency Task Force. And we'll also have introductions. So if everybody can prepare to deliver a short, I'm emphasizing the word short, a short introduction explaining who you are and what you do, that would be perfect. And also where you are. It's always nice to understand where people are geographically located. Okay, we're going to deal with introductions first of all. I'll then talk briefly about TTF's new subscription model, and then we're going to go straight into our first speaker, who is Shane Norman. Shane's going to be followed by Peter O'Donnell, then Mike Stafford, then Mr. Steve Conley. Lovely to see you, Steve, as always, sir. Okay, so I think we're going to get cracking. So let's get to introductions first of all. You might find it easiest to begin with if you put yourself onto what they call gallery view, which is where you see everybody in little pictures rather than the speaker in view. I'm going to invite my colleague Alexandra to introduce herself first and also cover off a couple of housekeeping notes. So Alexandra, over to you first of all, please. Then we're going to go to Mark Bishop, Steve Conley, Mike Stafford, and then I'll tell you who the next round of people are going to be after that. Alexandra, over to you.
Hello, evening everyone. I'm Alexandra. I'm the head of events at Transparency Task Force. I've been working with Andy since March. So I'll just quickly go through a few things. Just first of all, to let you know that we're recording this session, and we will be using, we will use some of it or all of it, share it on social media and upload on our YouTube channel. So if there's anything you don't want us to include, please just send me an email, let me know, and we can edit it out. We are also, obviously, please use the chat, so put your contact details in there, or any comments you want to make during the symposium, and I will circulate the chat in a follow-up email to everyone tomorrow, basically. Lastly, we're going to be tweeting during the event. And I'll also share our Twitter handle. So if you want to, share our tweets or tweet yourselves and tag us in it, please do. I think that's it. I'll hand over to Andy now.
Perfect, Alexandra. Thank you very, very much indeed. Talking about tweeting, we will be tweeting during the event. Please do find our Twitter handle is @transparency with a capital T. TF, capital T, capital F at the end, @transparency TF, capital T at the beginning, capital T at the end, and the capital F. Please do share or repost, etc., what we put out there, because social media is becoming an incredibly important part of what we're all about. Okay, we're going to go to introductions. Please do keep these as short and sweet as you can. We've got a lot to go through tonight. There's quite a bit of content, and we are covering a very, very important topic. We'll go to Mark Bishop, then Steve Conley, then Mike Stafford, and then I'll let you know who's after that so you can prepare. Mr. Mark Bishop, please say hello to everybody. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Andy. So my name is Mark Bishop. I am kind of founder of the Connaught Action Group, which represents the interests of people who invested in the Connaught Income Fund Series 1, which was a Ponzi-style fraud and also a spectacular case of regulatory failure. I sit on the Liquidators Committee for that group as well, and I've worked with Transparency Task Force really since late summer, I guess, particularly working on strategy and some of the submissions to consultations. Oh, and I live in Caterham in Surrey. There we are.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Mark. Mark's been wonderfully helpful on a number of fronts, including consultations. And I'm glad you mentioned that, Mark, because one of the objectives of this evening is to give people a chance, if they wish, to become part of Transparency Task Force's response squad. What we mean by response squad is it's when people volunteer to be part of the group that's actually going to write the response to this consultation. It really is an excellent opportunity to make sure that the voice of reason, the pro-consumer voice, is properly heard, and the deadline is December the 15th. So we've got good time to do a great job, and frankly, we've done some outstanding, and I'm biased, but we've done some outstanding work in recent months, and we want to make sure this is an equally good consultation response. Thank you, Mr. Bishop. We go straight to Mr. Conley. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Andy and everyone. I'm Steve Conley. I'm the founder and CEO of the Academy of Life Planning, which is a global non-intermediating financial planning network. I've been with the Transparency Task Force since very early on. I think I'm the 10th ambassador, and I was the founder of the market integrity team of the Transparency Task Force. Prior to that, I was head of investments at HSBC and head of investments at RBS Group and head of investments at Santander. And I was the chair of the BBA Bank Assurance Steering Group. But I left that, but more about that later.
Thanks, Steve. Is speaking later. Good to have you with us, Steve. Mr. Mike Stafford, as I said earlier, lovely to have you with us again. It's been a while, sir. Thank you, Mike. Please introduce yourself.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Mike Stafford, and I'm a director of a firm in Hartford called Stafford Wealth Management, an FCA regulated firm providing financial planning services to a small bank of clients, about 180 clients, and we've been in business since 1986. More of which will emerge later, no doubt. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Great to be here. We're now going to hear from Peter O'Donnell, then Seetal Chima. Hi, Seetal. Then Shay Norman, then Daniela, then Ian Hart. So, Peter, over to you.
My name is Peter O'Donnell, and I'm a director and owner of New South Law, an SRA regulated law firm. I'm a victim of fraudulent misrepresentation who now specialises in investment mis-selling and take action against FCA regulated persons who were never held to account and got away without penalty. I live in the very north of the county of Buckinghamshire.
Thank you, Peter. To Seetal.
Hi, I'm Seetal Chima and I'm an independent investment consultant. I also sit on the steering group, the BSI Sustainable Finance team, and the Transparency Task Force is the organisation I represent on that steering group. We've been working for 19 months on setting a sustainable investment standard for all fund managers to follow, which has now been published. And I'm pleased to report that the 48-page report is now being used as a basis for the ISO, the International Standard TC 322, which will set the standard for all fund managers in the globe.
Thank you very much.
Oh, and just one last thing. I've been asked to sit on the next suite of BSI standards so we can do individual asset classes, bonds, equities, property, private equity, and so on.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed, Seetal, for what you've been doing with the TTF. Seetal, please do. I encourage you to put your contact details, your LinkedIn link, etc., into the chat. If anybody has interest in the sustainability aspects of investing, please connect with Seetal because that could prove to be quite worthwhile. Thank you, Seetal. We're now going to go to Shane Norman. Hi, Shane. Oh, I think Shane might be frozen. He looks frozen to me. Yes, Shane's frozen. We're going to go straight to Daniela. Haven't seen you for ages, Daniela. Nice to please introduce yourself.
Lovely to see you again. Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Daniela Eshnerova. I'm a journalist at Money Marketing, which is a trade publication for financial advisors. I'm in Prague, Czech Republic, actually, which is my hometown. And I've had pleasure before of joining symposiums, but not for a while, so I'm excited to join you for this one.
Thank you, Daniela. We are not Chatham House. Transparency Task Force does not believe in Chatham House. We don't believe in that kind of secrecy. So say what you mean what you say, and work on the basis that everything you're about to say might be reported by somebody. And given that social media exists, everybody these days is a journalist effectively, so be aware. Thank you, Daniela. Angie Kirkwood, it's been months and months and months and months. Lovely to see you, Angie. Please introduce yourself. Thank you. Well, we can't hear you, Angie. You're not on mute, so your volume must be right down. Is that any better? We still can't hear you, Angie. We'll come back to Angie. We'll go to Rob Davis. Mr. Rob Davis, please say hello.
Hi, hope you can hear me. I'm Rob Davis. I run a small investment fund called the Munro Smart Dividend UK Fund, which is a halfway house between active and passive. I've been running it for about 12 years now. And I'm very conscious of the challenges that startups have, and this bridging this gap between professional world, which is regulated, and then the independent individual investor who's trying to bridge that gap. So I have a lot of experience in that. Thanks.
Thank you, Rob. As I say, we'll come back to Angie later. Francisca, please introduce yourself nice and succinctly. Thank you very much, Francisca.
Well, I live in Vienna, I'm English, and I have been a victim of financial mis-selling. I had got divorced. I had my fund in a UK FCA regulated situation, and I was stupid enough to put it into a dubious company who still promote themselves actively, and I'm really kind of interested in looking at that angle. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Francisca. We're now going to go to Sue Lewis, then Diane Waits, then David Masters, then Ian Hart. Sue, please say hello. Thank you.
You didn't warn me I was coming. Hi, good evening, everyone. Sue Lewis. I do bits and pieces, so I'm on the TTF advisory board, probably by virtue of once being chair of the Financial Services Consumer Panel. I've been a pension fund trustee. The list is quite long. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you for being with us again, Sue. Great to have your input. Hello, Diane. It's been equally a long time since we've seen you. It's been ages. Please say hello, Diane. I think, Diane, you are on mute. We're going to...
Hello, I'm Diane Wheats. I run a small financial planning company in Cheltenham called Ashley Financial Planning, and I'm interested in what Transparency Task Force is doing.
Great. Thank you. That was beautifully succinct. Mr. David Masters, hello, sir. Say hello.
Hi, Andy. Hi, everyone. David Masters. I'm partner director with Lansons, which is a financial services reputation and communications consultancy.
Thank you, David. We're going to go to Ian Hart, then George Melman, then Angie again. Ian, over to you.
Good evening, everybody. My name's Ian Hart. I run Unbiased Financial Group. I also run built a fund, which is a fixed income fund called AI Funds as well. And I'm interested to see how we can help Joe Public invest into fixed income.
Thanks, Ian. Let's go to Angie. Angie, please say hello.
You hear me this time?
We can, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Angie Kirkwood. I work with Scottish Widows in the policy team, basically an interest in everything pensions, retirement planning and at retirement, and I am currently just outside Edinburgh.
Thanks, Angie. We'll go to Shane. Shane, please say hello. Hopefully we can hear you and see you properly this time. It looks to me like Shane's got a very poor internet connection because he's frozen again. Alex Varley-Winter, then Mark Tabor, then Stan Kings. Alex, say hello. Thank you.
Hiya. So I do investigative reporting and media relations for Transparency Task Force, and I'm here with my daughter, so she might I might switch my camera off every now and again.
Thank you very much, Alex. Alex is doing a wonderful job on a purely voluntary basis, writing blogs and helping us with press releases and all sorts of things. Mr. Mark Tabor, if you're there, please say hello. I think we might not have. Yep. I don't think we have Mark with us yet. Mr. Stan Kings, please introduce yourself.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Short and sweet, please, Stan. Thank you.
I'm glad to be invited tonight to listen to what's going on. I'm very interested in people that have been scammed. Mine's a little bit different to perhaps a lot of you, the people that come on your Zoom meeting, so to speak. The fact is, I'm being scammed by the tax man, and I seem to be getting very good progress since I've been introduced to TTF.
Thanks, Stan. Thank you. If anybody might be in a position to talk to Stan about his case or might want to talk to Stan about his case, please put a note in the chat with your email address so that Stan can reach out to you. His case is very, very unusual. It's complex. I personally think he's not been treated justly whatsoever, and eventually the truth will come out, and I'm sure that hopefully one way or another justice will be served. So if you're able to help people in a being scam situation, please do reach out to Stan. Pop a note into the chat. We're going to go back to Shane Norman again. So Shane, please this time try to introduce yourself.
All right. I've tried on a different server, so hopefully this one will be stable.
Yeah.
Basically, I'm leveraging 40 or 50 years of experience in financial services in Asia and Europe and the UK, working with Rothschilds and various other names, leveraging that into the broad spectrum of business development for fund managers, whether that be regulatory development, marketing development, or business itself.
Thank you very much indeed. And I'm just going to stop that sharing. Okay, so I think that's everyone apart from Mark Tabor. I'll just check in with Mark Tabor once again. Oh, forgive me, Mark Northway as well. How could I forget Mark Northway? Mr. Northway, please say hello.
Hi, Mark Northway. I work with Sparrows Capital, which is a low-cost passive allocator. I also chair ShareSoc, which is the Individual Shareholders Society of the UK. And have a particular interest in subject matter because we are in the process of producing a ShareSoc and UXA joint response to the FCA.
Fantastic. Really good to have you with us, Mark. And Mark's organisation, ShareSoc, is involved with Better Finance, which is a pan-European pro-consumer campaign group, and TTF is also very proud to be involved with that organisation too. I think that's everybody that can introduce themselves. I'm now going to spend a couple of minutes or 5 minutes talking through a very, very important development. It is not directly relevant to this topic, but it is directly relevant to the future viability of TTF. So please take what I'm about to say seriously. We need, I'm stressing this word, we need to stabilize the finances of TTF. We think we've come up with a model that's going to work for us and everybody else. It just requires a little bit of commitment, and it requires what we think of as a simple, straightforward, give and take two-way relationship. We want and need to carry on doing what we were doing, and we think that the model we've come up with is the best way in which to go to the next development of TTF, having very recently become a certified social enterprise. So what I'm going to do is share my screen and talk you through our new subscription model. We want absolutely everybody in the TTF community to become a subscription member. So I'm going to explain what that means. What it means is this: there are now two types of members, subscription members and standard members. For standard members, very simple. A standard member is somebody that pays to attend each event on a as they go basis. The cost of our events, as you know, is 245 plus VAT per symposium. That's absolutely fine. If somebody wants to remain a standard member for any reason, they can. Although, to make it crystal clear and ultra transparent, it would be far, far, far more cost effective to become a subscription member. What is a subscription member? I'll explain. It's where you choose to pay in one of four formats. Either, number one, you choose to pay £480 plus VAT annually in advance, and that buys you free, obviously when I say free, I mean beyond that price, free attendance at any TTF event. So it's obvious if you're going to go to more than 2 events, that's going to be far more cost effective for you. Option 2 is £135 plus VAT per quarter, which is still a lot cheaper than being a standard member, but slightly more expensive than the annual upfront payment. Why? Because cash flow is king, and we need to do all we possibly can to bring cash into the organisation to fund us in the short term. That's why we've very deliberately skewed so that the upfront payments are actually the most cost-effective ones. The third option is £50 a month plus VAT. Very straightforward. The fourth option is the bit that needs explaining. What we're saying is this: we are definitely not here as a money-making business. Believe me, I used to earn multiples of what I earn now, doing what I used to do, working a lot less hard than I do now. TTF does not exist as a money-making machine. It definitely is not one. But what we do recognise is that not everybody can necessarily afford the 480 a year, the 135 a quarter, or the £50 a month. Therefore, it's very, very simple. You can choose to become a subscription member by asking for a condition. And the way it works very, very, very simply is you tell us what you can afford, and we'll organize on an individual basis for that to be your amount. Now, the next logical question is, well, what's the minimum? Otherwise, anybody can choose to pay anything. Guess what? There is no minimum. There is no minimum. We're just asking everybody to be as reasonable as you can afford to be. Please be cognizant of the fact that we need this model to work. Pay as close as you can to the standard figures of 480, 135 or 50, but there is no minimum. There won't be any kind of negotiation. We won't say, you know, that's not enough, please pay us more. Whatever the amount is, we'll say, thank you for your support, full stop. That's the model. There's therefore no monetary reason whatsoever for anybody to not become a subscription member. We think the subscription membership is an absolute win-win. And what we're hoping is that if enough people become subscription members, then we can stabilize our finances, we can plan ahead, we can forecast, we can budget, we can work out how many staff we can have, thereby know how much we can do, etc., etc. So please make an emotional decision now and a more serious one later, that one way or another, you're going to become a subscription member, because that really does make a great deal of sense. And I can say this without any kind of hesitation or concern, because I know this is the fairest possible model for our system to work. Okay, enough about that. If anybody's got any questions about it, pop me an email, but become a subscription member. That's the key message. We're now going to go straight to our first speaker, who is Shane Norman. Shane, please do get yourself off mute if you're on mute already. Just before Shane speaks, we're going to invite Jonathan Boyd to very briefly introduce himself. Jonathan, you're a very late joiner, but you've got in just in time to say hello to everybody. Please unmute yourself, Jonathan, and tell everybody a little bit, a teeny tiny bit, about who you are and what you do. Thank you.
Okay. Hi there. Yep. My most recent role was editing a publication called Investment Europe for fund selectors across the Europe region. I was involved with that for the best part of a decade. And as with many things these days, COVID knocked the model on the head. So I'm ramping up some other ideas at the moment. But obviously have had an eye on the TTF for some time, and the work that it's doing to sort of raise awareness of the issues that face not just retail investors, but I think big questions for the industry as a whole.
Thank you very much indeed, Jonathan. Great to have you with us. Let's go straight to Mr. Shane Norman. Shane, over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy, and good evening, everybody. When I was asked to deliver a short talk here, my immediate reaction was, oh gosh, another regulatory consultation, a sinking feeling at the thought. Not because we don't need regulation, obviously we do, and we're one of the most regulated industries anywhere, but my feeling of despair is that what we have isn't effective, and that's largely because I think of three particular reasons. One, and perhaps the most important, is a weak record of enforcement. Secondly, an inability on the part of the regulator, the FCA, or a reluctance to address long-standing issues, which are still not dealt with. And thirdly, lack of a full and proper consultative process. So, starting with enforcement. I want to give an example here. So I'm going to share my screen, and gosh, the technology is usually a problem for me. So let's see if this actually works. This organization, can you see it? I don't know.
No, we can't yet, Shane.
No. Okay, well, let's abandon that. I'll talk you through it.
Can you not press share screen?
I did press share screen and, wait a sec. Have we got it?
Wow, success.
Okay. So anyhow, back 23rd of July, I reported this organization in writing to the FCA. Anybody who's familiar with any kind of financial offering will immediately see red flags staring off the page here. It calls itself a bank. It's built on decentralized encrypted ledgers, uses all the magic management speak, fiat currencies to Bitcoin, there are no names of directors, there's no phone number, there's no, they talk of a fund, but they don't say what jurisdiction is constituted under. The whole thing is completely opaque. So I reported that, as I say, 23rd of January. This is today, this moment, the website is still there, despite the health warning at the top saying they're having all kinds of problems. And out there in the social media sphere, we have all kinds of pain being howled out by various followers who've been scammed by these people. So again, there's nothing absolutely done at all on this. Site is still active and the customers losing money and howling for activity. Secondly, we've had, of course, the, now how can I stop sharing? There we are. The second thing where enforcement has really not made any progress is with property funds. Now, we've all seen, of course, the 2016 referendum meltdown, another one earlier this year, still not fully resolved. But this liquidity mismatch in liquid property funds has been around for as long as the property funds have been in existence. So one has to ask, how could they have been constructed in that way in the first place? The Bank of England itself, in 2015, the Financial Policy Committee made a critique of them, and again, nothing was done. And we still don't have resolution to this day. Then we have finally, as an example, from the Woodford saga, the issue of authorized corporate directors. Billed as independent overseers of the fund manager's activities. Independent? I mean, really, are they trying to tell us a joke here? How can they be independent? They're paid by the manager, appointed by the manager. There's no way they're independent. This is a clear conflict of interest which has never, ever been addressed, and they are still fiddling around at the edges trying to do something about it. So next up is that actually should have been part 2, which is the non-addressing of long-standing issues, property funds, authorized corporate directors. I'm sure everybody here is familiar with others as well. And the third difficulty, I think, is one of process. Let's draw a comparison with the EU. They're not the most popular regulation in the world, but perhaps one of the most effective. After all, they began the UCITS, the first UCITS directive was in December 1985. We're now up to UCITS 6. There is a sense, therefore, of a clear regulatory development process. And the result of which is UCITS is the #1 fund brand in the world. If you go to South America, you go to Asia, all over Europe, it's the retail fund brand of choice. But excuse me, didn't we here in Great Britain invent the pooled investment vehicle about 150 years ago in Scotland with the first investment trusts, and then the unit trusts, which were brought to market by what was then Municipal and General, now M&G, in the late 1930s. Shouldn't we therefore be at the head of all this? Shouldn't our brands of retail funds be the world conquerors? But they're not. They're stuck in this island. So it seems to be the whole process of regulation in this country has been one of repression. It's one of reaction rather than proaction, and is resulting in an industry which is on every front losing ground to world competition. So, as I say, when I'm asked to comment on new regulatory consultation, it is just with a sigh of resignation that one does so, recognizing that here is going to be another piece of legislation, another box ticked in the legislator's policies, but no real action.
Jane, that was a very impactful 10 minutes or so. That really was. You make such a valid point. You're basically saying, as I interpret it, what's the point of more regulation if the regulation we've already got isn't actually being used as it was designed to be used? And if you're reporting what looks like, it's fraudulent, misleading advertising by crooks, and if there's evidence online that people are being harmed by it, why on earth has the regulator not closed down that advert? Shane, I have to put that into a question to you. Why do you think they haven't closed the advert down and done what they need to do to sort this out? What are your gut feels about this? You've been in the business a while. You've been around the block a time or two. I'm very interested in what your gut instinct is telling you about why this is still out there, because that pattern of people reporting misleading, fraudulent, dodgy advertising, but nothing appearing to be changed, keeps coming up time after time after time. I'm getting fed up of hearing about it. Shane, what's going on?
Are we back?
You are back, yeah.
I'm back. Thank God for that. Frankly, I'm dumbfounded. I would like to assume that it comes from the top. It usually does. That there is not a policy set in place from the very beginning, from the appointment of the guys in charge. There is not a policy put in place of any kind of proactive assistance to develop the industry. After all, when you work in a regulated entity, fund manager, bank, whatever, although compliance started out as being something of an us and them situation within the firm, I'm pretty sure that's long disappeared. Certainly it's not been my experience in the last 10 years. There's a sense that the compliance department works with the business development side, works with the marketing team and the product teams to build the best possible product in all circumstances. But the regulators do not seem to take that approach. It seems to be, let's wait for something to happen and then react to it. There doesn't appear to be any kind of proactive approach, any kind of sense of a policy engagement with the industry. And I feel this must come from the top, that the people who are appointed as it were as policemen, rather than as something which should be part of a policy for the industry to develop and excel.
Shane, thank you very much for such a forthright answer. I have to put this question to everybody because this is an issue that just keeps coming up, and I need to get my head around why it is that dodgy, fraudulent, misleading advertising is out there. It's reported to the FCA, and after many, many months, the organisation is still operating, and there are people online saying, I've been ripped off, I've lost my money, I've been scammed. I want to put that out to everybody, so I'm going to go to gallery view. Please wave your hand if you'd like to offer a comment or two about this particular matter, because what we're basically saying is, what is the point of more regulation if the powers they've already got aren't actually being used? Mr. Mark Bishop, let me draw you into conversation, then we'll go to Peter Donnell. Mark, what are your thoughts about this, sir?
Okay, so I think that it happens because there are no consequences to the FCA as an organisation or its individual employees if they don't do the things that we believe that they should do. And I think that there are really three strands of solution. The first solution is direct political accountability. If a minister or even a government were to fall as a result of a scam going unremedied for a long time, then scams would get the attention they deserve. And the second one is, I think that there should be some level of accountability to consumers. There is one consumer panel, which is mostly representing the industry and is appointed by the FCA, and there are 3 industry panels. Perhaps we should swap those 2 ratios around, and perhaps there should be a consumer organisation, it could be TTF, that nominates some of the members of the consumer panels, plural, just as the UK Finance and the City UK and others from the industry nominate the people who are on the 3 industry panels currently. The third thing, which is probably the most important one, is civil liability. If the FCA was civilly liable, if it failed to protect consumers, then it would probably protect consumers. And that, I think, is probably the single biggest strand. The other great benefit to doing things that way is that you'll have visibility of the degree to which the regulator is either succeeding or failing. You know, what is the effectiveness of the FCA? Actually, the single biggest measure is a negative measure, which is what is the level of misconduct cost. The lower it is, the better the job the regulator is doing. At the moment, we don't know what it's doing. There is no ability to measure it because there is no liability to the FCA.
Well, thank you for such coherent points. We'll go straight to Peter O'Donnell. Peter, please succinctly share with us your thoughts as well, please, sir. Thank you.
I'm Australian, mate. I don't know what succinct means. It's a political situation, like Mark Bishop said, that once you reveal one scam, you're obliged to reveal all the scams. And if we consider that in the UK, we're the global leader in only one industry, and that is financial services. The confidence in financial services is very low, but the government doesn't want it to be any lower. And creating a high profile going after scamsters is just not in their interests. And add to that, what I've found organisations like the FCA do is they say it's not our job. It's not within our remit. Oh, that's the advertising minister, or that's the information commission office. And so they're able to distance themselves from the need to be responsible. So it's political, protect the system, protect the UK's financial services system, and it's not our job. Remove yourself from any responsibility.
Thank you very much indeed, Peter. Peter's one of our speakers. We will hear more from Peter shortly. We have Mr. Brian Basham with us. I'm very pleased that we do. Brian, please introduce yourself. I know you're a late joiner, so not everybody knows yourself, Brian. Please take yourself off mute and introduce yourself and make your point. Thank you.
Brian Basham, I've been a financial journalist and I suppose corporate communications consultant, which is a long way of saying public relations, specialising in takeover bids. Been involved in the city for many, many years. I started as a journalist at the age of 19 and have carried on involved in the media ever since. So, and I've worked with a lot of very high profile people, advised a lot of senior people. Look, one of the people I think talks most sense about all this is Anthony Stansfeld, who is the Police and Crime Commissioner for Thames Valley, who really pushed through the case against the famous Reading 4 case, HBOS case. And his view, which I defer to, is that this is a matter for the police. These are scams, are frauds. The FCA is not inclined, as our friend has just said, to pursue them. And in my day, when I was investigating fraud, which is what I used to do, this would have been a matter for the City of London Fraud Squad. And that's where I think it should be. These are crimes. We have too little personal accountability. I quite agree that the FCA should be put on the spot, but actually what we need are some of these terrible criminals arrested and put in prison. And very few happens to very few. I mean, we've had a 2008 banking crash, a global financial crisis, and nobody in the main board director in the US or the UK has gone to prison. And I think that says it all, really.
Well, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to go back to gallery view so I can see everybody in little pictures. Would anybody else like to make a point in relation to what we've been discussing or anything else off the back of Shane's first talk? It looks like, oh, Francisca, yes, please share your point, Francisca.
Well, I've been really fascinated by what everybody else has said. Has anybody seen the film with Russell Brand about the Emperor's naked clothes? It's absolutely fascinating. Has nobody seen it?
No.
Okay, it's a documentary he created about how, you know, somebody steals a sausage and they're in prison for 3 months, but a banker can do enormous damage and doesn't end up in prison. It's a really fascinating film. I've actually seen it twice, believe it or not. But I also actually do think that most of the thrust of what we've been talking about is regulation. But I actually think there's a lot that we as individuals can do. And I know that I discussed in a previous meeting that people said, well, there are, you know, fraud allegations, etc. But I actually think that as individuals, if we were to publicize things that occur as an information, why shouldn't that work? We do this for viruses on the computer. We do it for, you know, there's so many vehicles on social media where we as private people can just say, I've just had this problem. What has anybody else got to say about it? Or I've just, you know, why can't we do it without regulation? That's really the question. Sorry.
Thank you, Francisca. Thank you for sharing your views. We're going to go in a moment to Mr. Mike Stafford. Before we do, please note I've just put into the chat the request. TTF is forming its response squad for this particular consultation. I'm very, very keen that at least part of our response is about the point that Shane made. You know, we need to be confident that the powers the regulators have are being used, that things are not allowed to fall between the cracks. We don't have this kind of revolving pass the parcel type dynamic. And very, very simply, if the authorities, be it the police, the regulators, any entity becomes aware because they've been told by the public that there is fraudulent activity going on, it must be acted on. Otherwise, we lose trust and confidence in the system. And if that happens to the nth degree, then all hell breaks loose. We really don't want this to happen. Forgive me, I've got the order of speakers wrong. It's actually Peter O'Donnell who's speaking next, not Mike Stafford. Thanks, Alexandra, for correcting me there. Okay, so before we go to Peter, we're going to show our appreciation to Shane. Those of you who are regulars will know that we do that by waving like we were 6. So please thank Shane for his session so far to get us off to a great start. Thanks very much, Shane. You've got the ball moving very, very nicely indeed for us. Mr. Peter O'Donnell, Alexandra's going to be timing things, so we're within 10 minutes, please. Peter, over to you. Thank you very much.
I will try. I'll say again, I'm a victim of fraudulent misrepresentation. My bank manager recommended me to put equity release interest-only money into a firm of chartered accountants in Leicester. They got away with £125 million and they got my money as well. And it was supported by a high street bank. At the moment, for a long time now, I specialise in investment mis-selling and taking action against FCA regulated persons who commit fraud and were never held to account and got away without penalty. We'll start with some known facts, but not used facts. Almost no ordinary person today knows anything about investing. I would say less than 1 in 500 adults knows about how to invest and what to invest with and who to talk to. Most people have 4 financial objectives: buying a home, having a pension, paying off debt, and saving for a holiday. Most people have loans and credit cards that reduce the ability to save for rainy days, as that is what credit cards are for. For those who have expendable income, inheritance or cash, the best way to use it is first to pay off debt, and for the rest, investing becomes a priority. But as bank rates are barely able to keep up with inflation, how do I make my money grow? The government has been and continues to tell us to save for retirement and invest wisely. They also say to only work with regulated IFAs to help and advise us on pension savings and investments. IFAs are paid by the amount of money clients put into growth vehicles and trail commissions as a percentage of funds under management. Commission is their major incentive, not investment growth. Until this situation is reversed, they will always have this conflict of interest. IFAs are permitted to advise clients on high-risk, unregulated investments, if clients can prove that they are sophisticated investors with excess cash. Everyone knows the difference between a regulated and unregulated product. That's sarcasm. Unregulated persons who advise on investments can be prosecuted for this, but that rarely happens. No one knows the difference. And if IFAs abuse their fiduciary responsibilities, lie, perpetrate fraud, and that causes us to lose our money, we can complain to them and then to the FSCS to put us back to the position we're in. If the IFA company stops trading, we can complain to the FSCS. If it is about our pension provider, we can complain to the Pensions Ombudsman Service. Who knows all this? Individual IFAs and FCA authorised company directors are not required to have professional indemnity insurance. Only the companies they work for do. This means if they give bad advice, they are never held personally accountable. Only the company they work for is. And if that company becomes insolvent, only the FSCS can consider a complaint. Combine the commission-only incentive with no-fault advice, there is no reason other than ethical and moral to stop this continuing. What most people should know about financial services, but don't, includes the following. What if an IFA, what is an IFA, and how I don't know if someone isn't? what is a regulated project as opposed to an unregulated product? If someone fails to tell me they are an IFA, why am I not to believe them? If recommended, what is described to be guaranteed government-backed and insured investments, what am I to make of it? Who do I ask? What website do I go to? Can I trust an IFA or directors of an IFA of an FCA regulated company if they can't be held accountable for giving me bad advice that leads to me losing my investments? Are buy-to-let mortgages secured and regulated, especially if recommended by an IFA? They're not. If asked to sign a document stating that I'm a high net worth and sophisticated investor, what am I to think? Is it true because I'm highly qualified in another profession, have a good job, a home and a pension, and having done well in life? Or is it just a way of making me think that my success in life transfers my ability to understand complex investment products? Are IFAs obliged to tell me if they are being paid secret commissions? And if not, how can I find out? The reality is that by far, the majority of people don't know much of the above. We rely on specialists and what we learn from public broadcasting. We are inherently optimistic and want to trust those who we are led to believe will help us. Consider London Capital and Finance, almost £250 million lost. They promoted investing in ISAs. Are ISAs regulated? With cash. They created ISA investment performance comparison websites and falsely made their ISAs on top of the table. They employed high-pressure salespeople, paid 30% of the funds invested to promote investing in their ISAs. They had a plethora of companies into which they transferred client funds, mainly offshore, as loans for those companies to lend to invest, and all money disappeared into the electronic ether. Is it the fault of the client not to have known this was a fraud? Because most people are not getting compensation. The current high-profile scam is called Dolphin Trust German Property Group. It is sold to clients, or it was sold to clients through 180 different sales agents for over 12 years. Average commission was 22% of funds transferred. Agents included regulated financial advisors, helping people push pensions into those investments, and non-regulated advisors and companies. A very sophisticated brochure and marketing materials were created. Over 6,000 people invested £1.6 billion in Germany property developments. It paid 10% per annum guaranteed until it went bust because the money ran out, as did the operator. The administrator has now stated there are no records and no funds that can be found. The point I'm making is that by far, the majority of people want to trust what they believe is good and credible people and promises, the system. The reality is that it is not a level playing field, and on face value, no one can be trusted with your money. I have clients who have been ripped off that include postmen, senior bank managers, an FCA compliance manager, senior law firm partners, insolvency practitioners, plumbers, members of parliament, doctors and barristers, young, middle-aged and older. People sold interest-only mortgages to invest in products that won't mature for 10 years and they are 85 years of age. Who hasn't signed up to a trial service with a debit card that automatically keeps taking money month after month and appears in our bank statement as a shop transaction that we don't recognise, but will attend to another time? Ancestry.co.uk, gym membership, magazine membership, premium bank membership with Lloyds. Hard to admit it, but we are all potential victims for financial abuse and always will be. The government wants a free market, and so what if some people fall through the cracks? That is a personal choice. There is no constitution of human rights, and banking and finance is the only global industry the UK leads the world in. Get used to it. There clearly needs to be a sea change in the way the average person can invest that is transparent, highly regulated, and within reasonable constraints available to everyone. High risk, shady, and unregulated investment products will always find their way to us, but that needs to be policed and protection afforded as much as possible. I'm almost finished. Like calories, salt, sugar, and fat content in food, investment products need to be easily labelled and members of the public educated on what to look for and avoid. We can't be trusted to make informed decisions about what we have no knowledge and experience in, and especially those who sell investment products more so. Getting on the housing ladder is now unavailable for most people, especially with student loan debt. Pension saving isn't compulsory, and many young people don't have sufficient incomes to put into them. IFAs are only paid on a percentage of the amount we invest, which given current and forecast interest rates makes investing through them lose money on an inflation-adjusted basis. Financial products are too sophisticated and complex for almost anyone to understand. The system of investing by members of the public must be made transparent and simple. Regulated financial advice must be disconnected from commission generated as a percentage of the funds invested. Individual financial advisors and company directors must have personal professional indemnity insurance. Members of the public need to be educated and better protected. There should be an investment regulator, especially tasked with implementing and managing this. Last sentence, it must get better, and only the government through pressure from public and special interest groups can help us do that.
Peter, thank you very much indeed. I know you've developed your experience the hard way through personal loss and personal experience of having to deal with the very, very bad end of what happens when rogues and crooks and dodgy people end up looking after other people's finances. Thank you very much indeed, Peter, for sharing your thoughts and for putting together such a coherent argument. Well, we've got 5 minutes for questions and comments in relation to what Peter has just said. So let's go to that. Please just raise your hand, whether that's digitally or otherwise, just to let me know you'd like to say something. I'm going to go to, we'll go to Rob Davis, then Brian Basham, then Mark Bishop, then Francisca. I'll try to remember that. Rob, Brian, Mark, Francisca. Rob, to you first of all. Thank you.
That was a very, very good talk, and there's a lot in it, and I won't attempt to address all of it, but one particular point that we can, there is a choice, is he talks about advisors being paid as a percentage of funds that they administer. Not all IFAs do that. There are IFAs that charge by the hour. They sell advice, like a lawyer or an accountant. So the first thing that the investing public can do, I probably won't win any prizes from IFAs for saying this, but you can select an advisor who charges by the hour. So therefore they have no ongoing interest in the product they sell or how much it grows or continuing sales. You're just being asked for advice, you get it, and you pay for the hours, the amount of time that you've taken.
Thank you, Robert, for sharing those points. I think the next in our list is Brian again. Brian, back to you. Please unmute Brian.
There we are. Thank you very much. Who cannot agree with what Peter said, except that I don't think it's a question for regulation, and as I've said before, more importantly, Anthony Stansfeld don't think it's a question for regulation. I really do believe that it's a question for policing. These are crimes. Until we have personal jeopardy and people they see the weight of the law, and we have a properly funded police force. Somebody put up a point that the SFO is underfunded, precisely. The SFO is underfunded. In fact, the SFO is entirely unnecessary. We have jolly good fraud squads in the City of London Police and the Metropolitan Police. They just need to let good coppers get on with the work and arrest these people. One of the people you mentioned, Peter, was Simon Hume Kendall's business, and I've particularly taken an interest in him. It's a most dreadful fraud. He's terrifically powerful chap. He's chairman of the local Conservative Association. I lived just outside Battle when he's a big figure down here. That's right. And he owns the Buellbridge Reservoir and all that sort of thing. And there's very little happened. You know, I don't know what's happened, but to him, he's still trading around.
He has been arrested.
Has he been arrested? No, okay.
All of the directors have been arrested.
Well, anyway.
They're under police investigation and caution.
I lost track of it after a while, and to my intense astonishment, I discovered in my address book I got every number under the sun for him, but I can't remember ever meeting him.
My company did most of the research for Smith and Williamson through Mishcon de Reya of the paper trail.
How very interesting. Yeah, well, I'm very pleased to hear that. But look, it is a matter, to my mind, it seriously is a matter of policing, and it seriously is a matter of personal jeopardy. And if we had personal jeopardy, my experience of dealing with captains of industry is once they feel the threat near them, they then clean up the industry themselves. I was very closely associated with the building industry and advised the chairman and chief executive of Wimpy for many years. And once they realized that corporate manslaughter was on the books and that they were potentially in danger themselves, suddenly the world was a sea of yellow jackets, and the unions have been asking that for years.
And helmets, yeah.
It was, within 6, Cliff Chatwood, a friend of mine who was chairman of, chief executive, then chairman of Wimpy, called me in a panic when the corporate manslaughter legislation came out. Yeah. And within 6 months, I do not exaggerate, within 6 months, there were yellow jackets, steel coat boots, hats, foldings, all those things that the unions have been asked for, because it's such a dangerous industry until then. And I believe that if we had personal jeopardy, and we had if we had Dennis, I'll name him, if we had Dennis Stevenson, the chairman of HBOS, Lord Stevenson, who I know very well, arrested, and and the evidence is there. If you look at the Turnbull report produced by Sally Masterton, there are 15 people who are deemed culpable, with Dennis, Hornby, and James, the other, at the top of the list. And none of them have been properly investigated or charged. It's most outrageous. But one of those people, and everybody would be cleaning it up. You wouldn't need the FCA. Anyway, there we are.
Thank you, Brian.
My hobby horse, I'm afraid.
Thanks again for your input. Let's go straight to Mark Bishop, and then we're going to go to a quick break. Mark, a further point from you, please.
Okay, so a few issues have been raised. The first one is IFAs. I absolutely agree paying somebody per hour is a good thing if you absolutely trust them and if you believe they have kind of perfect knowledge. In the Connaught case, a number of IFAs invested in the product because they genuinely thought it was good. So they were on also very, very low levels of commission. They weren't recommending it to make money. They were recommending it because they thought it was legitimate, and it would have been if it had done what had been said in the information memorandum. So a little bit of a notion of caution, which is that there can be false confidence created by going to an IFA, even if they're working genuinely for you. Second, of course, is that they're not always genuinely working for you. Peter raised the issue of GPG, Dolphin Trust, where they were taking secret commissions of 20 to 25%, which can clearly influence their judgment, and they're very unlikely to disclose these things. I think there's an issue been raised about why is it that the FCA doesn't go after these scammers, because if they are scammers, even if the FCA is regulatory capture, subject to regulatory capture, and maybe is in the pockets of the banks and very heavily influenced by the banks, why wouldn't it go after these kind of barrow boys? And I think the answer actually lies in what Peter said about those commissions, because if you hold the view that an IFA that's taking a commission of 25% must necessarily know that the product is a fraud, then what are you going to say about a bank that takes a commission of 50% plus on, for example, PPI, which most of them were doing? Clearly you've got to take the view that they knew that that was a fraud. You can't prosecute the guy that took 25% without going after the one that took 50%, which kind of brings us on to the question of criminality. And I absolutely agree with Brian Basham, that personal consequences for scammers, whether they are people outside of the regulatory perimeter or people within it, is absolutely crucial. The problem with it is, or the challenge has been, who is responsible for policing it? There are crimes such as fraud, for which the police are the lead prosecutors, but sometimes the NCA deals with these things, sometimes the SFO deals with them, sometimes it's individual police services that are responsible, and sometimes it's the FCA. The FCA prosecutes sometimes on frauds. You then also have regulatory crimes, things that people can be prosecuted for, issuing an IM without it being approved by a firm that's on the register, issuing a misleading IM, those sorts of things. the FCA is responsible for prosecuting those. It very rarely does. There are memorandums of understanding between the police and key police and the FCA, or key police services and the FCA, and the FCA tends to receive approaches from the police saying, here's a crime, it's to do with financial services, it's very complicated, we'd rather like you to do it rather than us because it's expensive and it requires specialist knowledge. So it then goes to the FCA and the FCA does nothing about it. That's why I think fundamentally you're not going to fix this until you create some level of clarity about which things are the responsibility of the FCA and which responsibility of the police, and there is some level of financial liability of the FCA if it doesn't do anything.
Thank you, Mark. One of the speakers we have at our December the 15th symposium, entitled Are the UK's Financial Regulators Failing? It's an interesting title, isn't it? Are the UK's financial regulators failing? One of the speakers is Prem Seeker, or I should say Baron Seeker, and he advocates a strategic overhaul of the entire regulatory framework to take these kind of conflicts of interest out of the equation, because how can a system work if it's fundamentally conflicted? People are being pulled in different directions. If you imagine an old Western stagecoach with a couple of horses pulling it, and the two horses are pulling in different directions, you think that's daft, that's stupid. Why on earth is, why is that happening? You're immediately doing something about it. And in my experience, over the last 5 years or so, I keep coming across a system that is riddled with fundamental conflicts, and there has to be part of the problem. That's why some kind of strategic overhaul of the system itself could well be long overdue. I can see Francisca and others want to say a few points. We're going to keep on track by taking a quick break now. In the interval, I'm going to be playing a bit of music. I found a song that's relevant to investment. Surprise, surprise. There is at least one out there. So we're going to reconvene, please, at 7 minutes past the hour. It's in 5 minutes' time, 7 minutes past the hour. And when we get back, we're going to go straight into our next speaker, Mr. Mike Stafford. I hope you're all okay so far. Just before we go to break, of course, we'll thank Peter in the traditional way by waving hands to show our appreciation for what he covered. You clearly prepared some very good material there, Peter. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, reconvene at 7 minutes past, folks. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Excellent. Okay, we now go to Mr. Mike Stafford. So, Mike, please do unmute yourself.
Hello again, everybody. When I got the invitation to speak tonight, I thought Andy had bugged my computer because I was just putting the finishing touches to the draft of my response to the FCA. So it looked like this presentation was appropriate for tonight. The FCA has asked people to put forward suggestions as to why things are going wrong. Most of them have been mentioned tonight. And so what they did was they sent out this document, and if Alexander would forward the next one for me, please. I issued this document with 39 questions, ranging from effects on financial advisors, on fund managers, on the public, and so on. And the document runs to 20 pages. If you haven't seen it, we'll send you the link afterwards so that you can have a look at it. But I've chosen here just 5 questions because we've just a small amount of time, and I want you to see some of the questions that we're dealing with. So the first one is question 11 from their document. Alexandra, what are the barriers to firms offering simple advice models? Now, as has been touched on earlier, there's no such thing really as a simple advice model. The FCA assume that if a product is what they might call simple, like a 30-day building society notice account, that's simple and everyone should know it. And therefore, IFAs should be able to do that for safety and move on. But if you don't know anything about the product, it's not simple. And most products, as Peter has touched on earlier, are very complex. And it is wrong to assume that they're simple. And it's also wrong to assume that they can be offered simply, because the full force of regulation comes down on a firm, regardless of what product they offer. I think what they're getting at here is they'd like to see firms offer advice at a lower cost. And that's reasonable enough. But the only way you can lower advice is to lower your trading costs. The fees that financial advisors charge, nations now having been removed some time ago, the fees that financial advisors charge are built up on a complex method. Their costs are not just operational and functional and staff and HR, but there's also regulatory costs. They can consume some of those, they can adjust them, they can reduce costs, they can delegate to the cheapest employee, all the usual ways of reducing costs. They have no control over regulatory costs, none whatsoever. And yet the FCA would like them to be able to offer their services at a lower cost. That's probably not going to happen. Next slide, please, Alexander. What do you think are the main causes of unsuitable advice? Everybody is going to jump and say, oh, I know. Well, there are several reasons for unsuitable advice, and they range from simple incompetence on the left hand, all the way across to outright criminality on the right hand side, if you were looking on a gauge. And so most of the benign unsuitable advice comes from incompetence. Incompetence can be trained out of somebody, education and so on, yet the financial services qualifications from 4 to 6 and 7 nowadays have put forward the reason that nobody should really be incompetent anymore. If they don't know about a product, they should perhaps just read up on it, do more research. But incompetence should be dealt with fairly easily. When it moves across to the other areas, such as dishonesty and lack of integrity, I'm not sure that you can untrain people. If they don't have integrity or honesty, they shouldn't be there. So the main causes for unsuitable advice are indeed incompetence to criminality. And then it's a question of how do you address the issues. Next slide, please. This is an interesting question. How do we prevent unsuitable advice without imposing additional requirements on firms which provide suitable advice? Are they talking about financial implications or what? Because if the firms are already providing suitable advice and are honest and doing it with integrity and with full competence, what would you impose upon those firms? I think what they're trying to get at here is, how can we move the burden of the costs of regulation back to the people who should be paying it, not the innocent? And that's where we need to look, because there, as has been touched on earlier, there's a wide range of people in financial services, from the very honest to the very criminal, and we know which side the focus has to be on. But as has already been touched on earlier, very little focus is on these people, and you have to wonder why. Next slide, please. What more can be done to ensure that compensation is paid, and the word is fairly there, yes, by those that cause the loss? The implication here is that the people who are causing loss to clients are not actually paying the fair, and so the FCA recognizes. I have my notes here. And Peter has touched on this. The first way of ensuring that the compensation is paid by those who caused the loss is to identify the culprit. Unfortunately, the focus is currently on firms, and as we know, firms don't give advice. Individuals do, And every single claim that goes to the FSCS contains the details of the individual who caused the advice and who caused the loss. So it's important to recognize that firms do not give advice. Firms do not cause the loss. Authorized individuals provide the advice using the facilities of a regulated firm. So I believe that once a claim on the FSCS is successful, the culprit should be offered the option to refund the client with a reprimand appearing on his or her FCA record. If the culprit is unwilling or unable to refund the client, deauthorization should follow immediately. Reinstatement should only be allowed when the FSCS is fully reimbursed. Now, we'll come to issues about doing that. So until the debt is fully discharged, the culprit's name should appear on a deauthorized list available for all to see on the FCA website. And this would be extremely useful to firms recruiting advisors. Check whether there are any misdemeanors reported. Up to now, it's very difficult for firms. They don't know who's coming and going. And that approach will have the greater deterrent now than where advisors can hide behind company names. It's the firms that are being reprimanded and wound up and fined, not the individuals who are creating the problem. Final slide, please. So what do you think should be done to help ensure that the polluter pays? So we now know that there is a person who causes the problem, that's the polluter. So I would say that the practice of permitting firms to self-authorize their new recruits should be abandoned. It just encourages the dishonest advisor to find refuge in an unsuspecting firm and expose it to bad practice before moving on and repeating the exercise elsewhere, without any of the good firms being aware of who these people are. It's appropriate to mention phoenixing here. Many of you will know what phoenixing is, when a firm winds up and emerges the next morning with a slightly different name, with the same directors, same address, same phone numbers, and so on. The FCA is trying to do away with phoenixing amongst financial services firms. And why do they do it? Well, it's to set aside the accumulating potential debt mounting on their client bank. Because if they have a claim and then it goes wrong and their PI insurance premium doubles, the only way they can ever get rid of get their premiums down is to get rid of their client bank, so to speak, by reinventing themselves. And the FCA are allowing this. But what they're not doing is identifying who in the firm is the problem. But this is common practice. In financial services, it's done to offload the accumulated potential liabilities and obtain PI insurance. And this means that for every firm that leaves the market, the potential liabilities pass to the remaining firms. For people outside of financial services, they find this extraordinary. I said to one of my clients who is a large scaffolding contractor that if he has a claim against him that goes wrong and he has to pay out and doesn't have the money, all the other scaffolding contractors in the country have to contribute to compensating his client. And his immediate reaction is, why don't they have insurance? And this was touched on earlier. The firms have insurance, the individuals don't. And that's something that I would be suggesting to the FCA that they need to address. So the emphasis turns from firms to the individuals. Then the problem of phoenixing will disappear, because who will care whether the firms rise or fall? It's the individuals we need to get, whether they're working for Barclays Bank or Joe Bloggs around the corner. And it will deter the individuals within large organizations from following orders to push certain products when they know it's their personal reputation that's at stake. Now, there are flaws with this, because the PI market is not conducive, it's not fit for purpose. And so it needs to be addressed, or any individual reasonably take on the role of giving advice on a fiduciary basis. But the primary aim is to continue to ensure that consumers are refunded in full for losses caused by wrong advice. And we need to use PI insurance on the individual advisor to replace the burden currently resting on authorized firms, and to reduce the burden on the FSCS by redirecting claims to individuals and their insurers. Thank you.
On the contrary, Mike, thank you. That was first class. What beautifully clear, well-founded, evidence-based set of ideas, Mike. That was really, really good. Thank you so much. Basically, you're going to be in our response squad, okay, Mike? So please don't resist. I'll keep going until you say yes. We want you in our response squad because we'll be able to use and develop and elaborate on the points that you've just made. We'll go to questions and comments in a moment, but just before I do, I want to share with you all one of the pages on our website. So these are the previous. In fact, these are some of the previous. We haven't actually got them all on the site yet. Some of our previous consultation responses. We've been very, very busy. Bear in mind, folks, that roughly 10% of consultation responses to financial regulators comes from pro-consumer organizations. 90%-ish comes from industry, and that's why we think our voice is so important. That's why we are doing what we're doing and building an international movement for change by creating opportunities for individuals who have a pro-consumer view to find ways to actually get their thoughts across. Now, I'm very, very sure that there's already some very, very good material in this one here, TTF's duty of care discussion paper. We are absolutely convinced that the decision made by the FCA to not progress the pursuit of a duty of care legally enforceable responsibility was a mistake. We suspect it may well have happened because of pushback from the industry. We believe it's been kicked into the long grass. We don't know, but that's what we think. And we think that if the FCA seriously wants to fix what's wrong in the consumer investment market, it needs to revisit the duty of care principles, because that would be an absolute game changer. We're absolutely convinced of that. We also think that there's some merit in looking at the complaints against the regulators paper we produced recently. That was an interesting one. And also, without a doubt, the HM Treasury's consultation on financial promotions, i.e. clamping down on misleading advertising, is also key. And the next thing I'm going to quickly show you before we go to Q&A off the back of Mike's excellent talk is open letters. We've written a few. They're not all on the website. There was one to the Prime Minister a couple of months ago, and this very recent one to the new Chief Executive of the FCA. I'm pleased to say we're in dialogue with the FCA on some pretty important matters. And the one bit I want to highlight here is that on our list of, our wish list, if you like, of things that really needs to happen, again, we really do re-emphasize the idea of the duty of care responsibility, and also this one. Everybody knows that one of the planks of regulatory thinking post the global financial crisis was, let's make people individually accountable. That made sense, yeah? Everybody said, well, you know, we need to make people individually accountable. So the regulator spent a lot of time and effort producing the senior manager certification regime. And I personally think it's quite embarrassing that it would appear, I'm using my words very carefully, it would appear that it hasn't been used fully once since. There's something wrong there. There's something wrong there. So I'll include links to these points in the chat in a moment. But that's enough from me. Basically, I want everybody that's interested to become part of the response squad. The more people we have, the more effective our consultation response can be. Thanks again, Mike, for a great presentation. I'm going to go to gallery view so I can see you all. Please just raise your hand if you'd like to make a point at this point. We've got Peter O'Donnell, Mark Bishop, Brian Basham, and Mike Stafford. Oh, yeah, Peter, to you, please, as succinctly as an Australian can. There we go.
The issue with personal accountability and the senior managers regime, which I'm subject to with my company, is that if you're caught with your hand in the till and criminal negligence, all you have to do today is put your company into insolvency. As soon as it's insolvency, or as soon as you lose your PII, you fall out. You're no longer regulated, and the FCA has no interest in you. You fall outside their remit. You fall under the remit of an insolvency practitioner. Insolvency practitioners have to fill in reports, an online report about director behaviour. Now, director behaviour, the information goes to the Secretary of State for Business. Now, he's the wrong person for that to go to if it's an FCA regulated company. Those reports don't go to the FCA. Additionally, there are no questions there of a financial services nature. So no matter what happened, all you have to do is close your company and phoenix it. But people don't phoenix. They start another company years before because they know that they're going to go into that position, and they can leave all of their creditors behind. And no one I've ever seen on the FCA register who's done that has any black marks against their name.
You've identified a massive flaw in the system, Peter. Thank you so much. We're going to go to Sue Lewis. Sue's not yet had a chance to contribute, so let's go to Sue Lewis. Please make your point, Sue.
Yeah, thanks for that. I was interested in some of those questions. We did have a thing called basic advice, of course, which was how advisors were meant to sell stakeholder products, which Ron Sandler recommended almost 20 years ago now. You have to be a bit of a historian to remember it, but it didn't work well, and eventually it fell foul of MiFID II and just kind of disappeared. I do think there's something in simple products, but maybe I'll say something about that in just a minute. The other thing is around enforcement. I mean, what the FCA does is it can't meaningfully supervise the number of regulated investment IFA firms. It can't do it, too many of them. So what it does a little market study. It finds that, 30% of advice is unsuitable. It issues guidance, and it goes back a year later, and surprisingly, there's still 30% of advice that's unsuitable. Rather than really, bearing down on those guys, enforcing against them at the beginning, it just does it through guidance and guidance and guidance. And so nothing happens because everyone knows there's no consequence to poor advice or unsuitable advice. The regulator is not going to touch them. So we just go through this cycle of, saying, actually, this market's not working very well. Let's issue some guidance. Oh, look, nobody's taken any notice of it. Until you break that cycle, not a lot's going to happen, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you very much indeed. I think we had Brian's hand up as well. So Brian, back to you, please. And then I'll ask anybody else that hasn't yet had a chance to make their point. So Brian, back to you, please. If you unmute, please, Brian.
Mike, very clear presentation. Look, crookery comes from below and comes from above. So if you could, from below, you've absolutely personal jeopardy. We've got to create personal jeopardy. From above is quite interesting, I think. And Paul Moore, who of blessed memory, who died recently, gave evidence many years ago to the John McFall's Treasury Select Committee, in which he advocated regular ethical training for people in the financial services industry. Now, he wasn't really saying people have no ethical understanding, although some people might not. But what he was doing in suggesting that, what he intended to do, I discussed with him earlier, was to empower people to be able to say, look, I'm being asked to do something which is wrong. Now, it was alleged that Andy Hornby at HSBC, there was a story about him instructing local managers to buy cauliflowers and put them on the desks of people who sold the fewest mortgages. And there was a lot of stories about people being sold mortgages at the age of 80 and 85, which could never be repaid, just in order to get the numbers up. somebody who had ethical training would be able to say, look, this is wrong. And I think Paul was exactly right about that. So from below, personal jeopardy; from above, you've got to have ethical training, in my view.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you in particular for mentioning Paul Moore. Paul Moore was very well known to one of our members, Robert Delmer, and we're working with Robert, and this is Robert's idea. Let me rephrase that. Robert Delmer had the idea of having a Paul Moore Award, which will be presented annually to somebody that's demonstrated courage in whistleblowing, which is exactly what Paul Moore did, and he paid a big price for doing it. So if anyone's interested in the Paul Moore Award, we're looking for people to create a project group that was basically work out the kind of, the logistics of it. How do we decide who gets it and all that kind of stuff. It's a wonderful idea by Robert Delman, one of our ambassadors, and he was a very, very good friend of Paul Moore's. He worked with him for quite some time. Thank you, Brian.
Can I just say one thing?
Please do, yeah.
Sorry, that would achieve quite a lot of very sympathetic press coverage, I'm quite sure, because Paul was much loved and highly regarded. Sadly, the pressure he was under actually completely drove him bonkers. And he, if you consider a nervous breakdown bonkers, he hit the bottle. It was a wrecked life. He came back, but it killed him. It's the most terrible.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you. We had an event recently called Fixing Banking, and Paul Moore was whistleblowing on very bad practice in the banking sector. So the event was actually dedicated to Paul Moore, and Robert gave a presentation in it acknowledging Paul's contribution. People like that have made a real difference. We're also, by the way, next year, as well as a film club we're getting off the ground, where we'll have conversations about films like The Wolf of Wall Street, Inside Money, The Inside Job, Dirty Money, etc. We're also going to have a book club, and the very first book club review session is going to be on Paul Moore's book called Crash Bank Wallop. That's some date in January. Alexandra, when we circulate notes afterwards, please let's make sure we let everybody know about the Paul Moore Book Club review, and let's make sure that Tina circulates a link to the Fixing Banking video of that event, because it was of interest to a lot of people. Thanks, Alexandra. We're going to go quickly to Mark Bishop, and then we're going to go to a final speaker, Mr. Steve Connolly. Mark, your point, please. Thank you.
Okay, so Mike raised the issue of PI cover. I think that should be in our response to this consultation. One thing I learned the hard way with Connaught is that this PI cover operates on a claims made basis. So if somebody sells a dodgy product in 2018 and it comes to light in 2020, it's the insurer of 2020 that picks up the cost of it. The problem is these PI insurers are much better at spotting scams than the FCA is. So generally they exclude the stuff that is likely to result in claims, which is why in the main PI cover doesn't cover the things that you need it to. I think that needs to be looked at. I don't know how many players there are in this market, but my suspicion is there are very few and it's highly specialised. If there were more competition in this market, then perhaps there would be other insurers that would operate in a different way. Or perhaps if the FCA were to set a rule that says claims-made insurance is no longer acceptable, it's got to be based on the date on which the issue arose rather than the claim is brought. If that were to happen, then the market would be reformed. The second thing I would like to talk about is that somebody, I think it was Brian, raised the issue of insolvency practitioners. It's true, and I've seen it in Connaught in many other of these scams, that the insolvency practitioners are often put in by the directors. And of course, that means that they're people who have an interest in keeping the lid on whatever happened. In regulated firms, they also have to be approved by the FCA, not as in their regulated firms, but they actually have to be given the authorization at court by the FCA to be the insolvency practitioners. And I have known of cases of insolvency practitioners finding it difficult to be put in place where there is an issue of regulatory failure and a suspicion that that insolvency practitioner might get to the bottom of it. So there is a need to reform there. There is an insolvency practitioner that we work with I'm working with on Connaught, who we put in because they would be likely to do a good job, and I'm trying to get them involved in TTF. One of their colleagues who works in a different area, regulatory compliance, is already involved in TTF, and I'm trying to get the insolvency people in as well.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much. Let's now show our appreciation to our speaker who went through a wonderful set of ideas. Mike Stafford, that really was particularly clear and particularly coherent. So you know what to do. Please do all thank Mike for that session. And Mike, one way or another, you're going to be in our response squad because we really need you in it. Thank you. Superb. Our final speaker is Mr. Steve Conley. Then after that, we've got the Just a Minute round, inspired by Radio 4's no repetition, hesitation or deviation. Within a minute, make your point. But first of all, we got 10 minutes from Mr. Steve Conley. Steve's a wonderful contributor to TTF, one of the first ambassadors. It was because of Steve Conley that we developed. It was his idea, absolutely his idea, the entire market integrity team within TTF. It was because of Steve that we ended up doing a complete review of about, I think, 50 codes of conduct within the financial services sector. We wrote a white paper, we had a special event, and we've done all sorts of stuff, all off the back of the original inspiration of Steve Conley. I can remember now the very first telephone conversation I had with Steve. It was inspirational. He talked to me about why he left very senior roles in the bank, and I knew from that conversation that here we had a man who was exactly on the TTF wavelength. He has a stand up, not stand by mindset. That's what makes us different. Our only allegiance is to doing good, and that is what I believe makes TTF something pretty special. And whether we're good or not, I don't know, but I do know this: we're trying as hard as we possibly humanly can to make a difference. Mr. Steve Conley, you're definitely somebody who's making a difference. Please do share 10 minutes with us with your thoughts. Thank you, Steve.
Great, great introduction. Thanks for that, Andy. It's much appreciated. I'm going to pick up on a few points that people have made, and I'm going to share my screen if that's okay as well. So I'll just do that while I'm talking. So first of all, Andy, you said, you know, in the olden days, you earned multiples of what you do now by doing a lot less work. And that's really where I start with what I'm going to talk about. Yeah. So can you see the slides okay, everyone?
Perfectly.
The other thing I'm going to pick up on is a couple of other points. Rob, you said you won't win prizes by saying what you want to say. I'm not going to win prizes by saying what I'm going to say. So I just kind of get that. There's going to be people who are seriously upset by what I'm about to say. And also, you know, the thing is that it's what it ends up being about in the end is actually, just get this again, just making sure. I'm trying to do my screen. Oh. That's so strange. No, it's not. I'll have to do it a different way. So it's the obviously some reason it's not working. The show slideshow. I just think it's. Just checking. Yes, there we go. Got it right. Okay, this is a picture of me when Andy was talking about when I was head of investments at HSBC. And I gave it up about 10 years ago. And I was, the reason I gave it up was because of a conflict between profit and principles at the bank. And my colleagues were putting profit first and I was putting principles first. And we agreed to disagree and I left. And ever since then, I've been campaigning for principles in the bank. I wanted to make a point of that because what I'm going to talk about is a very thorny subject, which is incentives. So we've talked about it being, Peter mentioned it, commission is a major incentive. And this for me is the elephant in the room. And what we see with the request, the call for input is really sticking plasters over things that aren't really the issue. And the real issue for me is actually about incentive. And this is actually an article from Money Marketing 4 years ago. And it's about a question of decency about how much is too much to pay for advice. I don't expect you to read what was in the article because that's obviously far too small. But the quote that I pulled out is the question of what is appropriate to charge for advice may be one for the regulator. But the UK regulator has previously stated it does not want to intervene in policing advice costs. So it's completely doesn't want anything to do with it. Now, in June, we saw in CP26 about pension transfers, a couple of statements made by the regulator. One was that over time, these charges, the ongoing charges in this particular place, can have a significant negative financial impact on consumers. I'll just give you an indication of how significant. There's a 5 billion of revenues taken in fees by the UK advisor industry every year. And typically 50% of that could be recurring income. So it could be as much as 2.5 billion of income is taken as ongoing charge. It's actually a significant charge. And taking that out of people's pots over a lifetime, I'm sure you would agree, could have a significant negative financial impact for consumers if value wasn't being added. And the second point in the paper was that our view, that's the regulator's view, is that many consumers would not benefit from ongoing advice as their circumstances are unlikely to change significantly from year to year. So these 2.5 billion that's been taken out of pots of people's investments and savings actually might not be of any great significance or value to many customers. So at the same time, June, there was actually an article in the Telegraph a month later saying financial advisors charge clients almost £3,000 a year, but don't see them for years. So there's examples of thousands of pounds being taken out and still no one being seen. In Australia, the regulator does intervene in these fee for no service scandals. And there is £5 billion worth of compensation being paid by banks and institutions that have taken out fees for not delivering a service. And that's been returned. And the regulator has instigated that. What I don't understand is why our regulator takes this view. It's nothing to do with us. It's, I think it was Peter that said, it's not our job, not our remit. Yet regulators in other markets like Australia and India decide to do something about it and put a wall between the distribution and the advice so that fees aren't paid for no service. This was in the Telegraph in September. St James's Place didn't contact me for 17 years, but still charged me thousands of pounds. So this particular client had been paying 0.5% for an advisor to call, and no one had called. The Telegraph got involved in the case and did get the fees returned to the client. However, a typical regulated financial planner at St James's Place might have 170 clients to service, and 70 of those clients are what they called orphaned. So they don't actually see those clients. And as a result of not seeing the clients, there's no service delivered. And it works out about, for St James's Place, about £2.5 million of recurring fees that are taken out of clients' accounts where for these orphan clients, 2.5 million, and over, sorry, 250 million, sorry, I've understated that, 250 million. And if you add that up over 20 years, which is the period of this, that becomes about £5 billion compensation just for St James's Place. But yet, there's no mention of this in the call for input, the consumer investment market, no mention of fee for service. It's a national scandal in Australia, yet no mention. It's written about in the papers, yet no mention. And this is a quote from the Telegraph of a reader that said, the industry, all they want to do is plug into your assets and charge a fee. For me, that says everything about, it's not a secret that this money has been taken out. The public know about it. So I kind of say, I gave up a very well-paying job 10 years ago in order to pursue principles. And maybe we have to, ask that same question for ourselves and think, would we be willing to give up an asset that we're sat on that's giving us recurring fees and take the same steps that many other people do? And I think it's very poignant today to kind of do that, because obviously it is Remembrance Day. And, we think about the time when other people, for our tomorrow, they gave their today. And I'm kind of really asking that maybe if we want to see change happen, we've got to really take that same stance and that same approach, to be prepared to give up for what is right, what is dearly valuable to us. So yes, we're not going to make friends. I'm not going to be very popular for saying what I'm saying, but it has to be said, I think, for the benefit of the public. So that's it, Andy. I'll be open to questions and I'll stop my screen share there.
Steve, thank you so much for speaking straight from the heart, as you always do, with tremendous impact. And I can vouch for the fact that Steve is making a lot of sacrifices to do what he does. He's a highly motivated man, he's a highly principled man, and he's a great example of the way that this sector ought to be behaving. You know, the financial services sector of all industries is the one that is most dependent on being trusted. Yeah, the word credit comes from the Latin word credere, which means belief in. We have to believe in the financial industry for it to work. If you take belief and trust and confidence out of the sector, there is nothing left. It is mission critical. It is of systemic importance that somehow conduct changes sufficiently for trust and confidence to be restored. And all the time we have kicking the can down the road policy initiatives, we're never going to get to the problem. And what Steve is saying so rightly is, let's get to the, let's cut to the chase. Let's work out what is driving the poor conduct and let's attack it head on. Thank you so much for an enlightened set of thoughts there, Steve. Let's go to comments and questions. So please wave your hand if you'd like to say something. Thank you. Francisca, over to you, as succinctly as you can, Francisca, because we have to keep an eye on the clock. Thank you.
Okay. I feel that we've discussed two different methods of dealing with a situation. One is regulatory and the other is policing. I think the third element is, what can we bottom up do? And that is an area which I know I mentioned in a previous meeting, but I'm just really saying, what can we as individuals do using social media, maybe a website where we report things, and just police it ourselves? Wikipedia is an example of something that succeeded against Encarta, which was created by Microsoft. I know this is a totally different idea, but Encarta was created by Microsoft and it had largely failed. Wikipedia has succeeded because different people put stuff into it.
Thank you very much indeed, Francisca. Mark Bishop has raised his hand. Nice and succinctly, please, for me, Mark.
I'd just like to respond to what Francesca said, actually. I think it was Nicholas Shaxton, the author, who said that money really loves London, the city, because we have very weak regulation, which means that they can scam everybody and get away with it. But we have very strong laws, criminal and civil laws, which means that nobody can take their money. Whereas if they were operating in some tin-pot dictatorship, then probably the government would extract all of their cash. And I think probably that may be an indication as to how we could deal with these things. And it's just an early idea, and I just offer it as discussion. But the cost of getting a judicial review of something, for example, the FCA deciding not to act in a particular case where we think it should, is not huge. The cost of a private prosecution of an individual who's committed an egregious crime in a situation in which the regulator refuses to ban them or prosecute them, again, is not an enormous amount. And funnily enough, you get back most of it from the state if you succeed. And I just wonder whether, we might want to consider, if there was a really obvious prima facie case, crowdfunding these sorts of initiatives. And it would not be in order to police the industry ourselves. It would be in order to humiliate the regulator and kind of point up to the media and the police, and the politicians, the degree to which it was not doing its job, in order to hopefully get it reformed or replaced.
Can I come in, Andy?
Please do.
I wanted to reply to this earlier on, but we ran out of time. So I do publicly speak about these scammers, and as a result of that, they make attacks on me and my family. But it doesn't stop me anyway. I still carry on with it. Now, that's the problem with it being the public. You will get attacked. And the thing is that the scammers are the ones with all the money. And the victims, or the people who stick up for the victims, are the ones without any money. And we have very weak regulation, strong law. Very good point. And as a result, the scammers are kind of threatening you left, right, and centre with lawsuits because they can have solicitors, the best solicitors, at their defence. So it takes a long time to bring someone down. You have to follow the proper procedures, which is involving the various law firms, insolvency practitioners, and the various regulators and the police. And it's a concerted effort, and it takes years to take them down. And in the meantime, if you put your head above the parapet, criticised a scammer, you're getting attacked pretty much daily. So they've put all stuff on my business. Trustpilot has got all scammer comments on it. I've got email messages threatening to come and do things with my family, stuff like that. But I'll just carry on anyway and stick up for the many victims. So but that's what happens. So the answer is, really, it should be the police's job, and I think we've had that point already. They just pass it on. The local police just pass it on. Say, no, there's been that many complaints about this particular scam. We've sent it to the SFO, and then I find it just disappears into waste paper basket at the SFO, and nothing happens. It's just absolutely ridiculous. So that was my point.
Steve, thank you so much. Let's show our appreciation, as you know we do, to Steve for that great session. Thank you very much indeed, Steve. I salute you for sharing your thoughts in the way that you have tonight. Thank you very much. We're going to go to our Just a Minute round in just a moment. The order is going to be Sue Lewis, David Masters, Rob Davies, Sital, Ian Hart. I don't think Mark Tabor's with us because that's why I've missed Mark out. Just before we go to the Just a Minute round, I want to draw your attention to something I'm putting into the chat. We have TTF TV. So this is the web page of TTF TV. We have all sorts on here. It's just a start, but we'll end up with loads on here. The particular video I want to draw your attention to is the Jason Su leadership interview. Oh, forgive me, you're not seeing my screen, are you? Must remember to share the screen. I've got to share the screen. This video here, the Jason Su leadership interview, it's just under 1.5 hours. It's really good. In that interview, he makes a point which supports what Steve's been saying perfectly. He says, we must take the incentive to do the wrong thing off the table. We must take the incentive to do the wrong thing off the table, which I think is a very powerful quote that fully supports what Mr. Steve Conley has just been saying. Thanks again, Steve. Let's go to Sue Lewis. Sue, it's just a minute. The clock is running, so ready, steady, go.
Go. Okay, lots of ways to approach this. I think the FCA is in some ways asking the wrong questions. It's not really looking at this from a consumer viewpoint. Now, most people invest through their pensions, but thinking about sort of individual investment, what do people want? They want to know what they're buying, some understanding of it, what it's going to do. They have to understand what's under the bonnet, but they have to understand what it's going to do. They have to understand what it costs and what it's going to get them, what to do, who to trust, and what to do if things go wrong. So, and I think if the FCA kind of looked at it from this standpoint, rather than it's tinkering, we've been tinkering in investment markets since I mentioned Ron Sandler's report into long-term investment savings 18 years ago. We've been trying to solve the same problem pretty much ever since then. And I think there is room for something simple. There's room for kite marks, I believe, a bit controversial, which could be pre-approved products. Again, quite controversial. The FCA will never do that because it gives them the liability, but another organisation could do it. Need a much better register, much wider, awareness of the register, and most importantly, need to jail a few people. That's my minute.
Thank you very much indeed, Sue. You crammed a lot into your minute very effectively indeed. I like the last line, we need to jail a few people. The deterrent lever is not being used to any great effect at all. I completely support what Sue just said there. Thank you, Sue. Let's go to Mr. David Masters, who's been a regular supporter of TTF in many ways, including hosting some pretty memorable symposia pre-COVID. It seems like a lifetime ago now. Mr. David Masters, please share your thoughts without repetition, deviation, or hesitation. Go for it, sir. Thank you.
I'm afraid I fail on the deviation point straight away, but thanks, Andy. So, you know, this has been fascinating conversation. You know, consumers don't really have the wherewithal to engage with the investment industry. The practitioners seem to either lack the integrity or the competency to deliver what consumers actually need, and the regulator seems to be caught between a rock and a hard place, sorting out what is actually wrong with the sector, scams, etc. But also, you know, the sort of lack of political will to really make a fundamental change. And I think a lot of this comes back to the lack of political will. You know, the UK, London, it's a massive financial centre. It's one of the biggest financial centres in the world, but it's also the money laundering centre of the universe. And I think until we can identify a way of engaging the policymakers to actually make fundamental changes and tackle the heart of the problem, it's going to be really difficult to make any other meaningful changes. I mean, they've failed to do so up until now. But what a great opportunity we live in, you know, at the moment. You know, to rip things up and start again, build back better. You know, there's never been, you know, never let a good crisis go to waste. But I think the real problem is, you know, inertia, the status quo. These are hugely immovable blocks. But until we can persuade, you know, the people who run the finance sector, people who run the country, to actually start to try and shift them, then I don't think they'll make a great deal of headway anywhere else. That's my minute, Andy.
That is a great minute, David. Thank you very much. And I should also acknowledge that David is very kindly one of the members of our advisory group, as well as Sue Lewis. Thank you, David. Let's go straight to Robert Davies. Robert, please share your thought. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Chapter 8 of this call for input talks about competition and innovation. Unfortunately, I'm old enough to remember the 60s and the 70s when a chap called Freddie Laker shook up the airline industry. But he was forced out of business by rivals because consumers or passengers then were forced to buy airline tickets through intermediaries, through travel agents. Eventually, Freddie Laker's ideas came true. We now have Ryanair and EasyJet because we buy direct. The airline has a seat to sell. Consumer wants to buy a flight, they just go direct. Finance is unique in an almost obliging the consumer to go to an intermediary. And as Bob Woodward said, follow the money. And as Upton Sinclair said, it's very hard to believe something when your salary depends on believing something else. So intermediaries are always conflicted. There's not a straightforward transaction there. And until the finance industry can sell directly to the consumer through the mass market, as this paper talks about, there's always going to be this dichotomy of interest. The interest of the consumer is not necessarily, or it could be, the same as the person giving the advice. And what the industry needs to do is to do what Freddie Laker did with airlines nearly 40, 50 years ago, when the DC-10 and the jumbo jet suddenly increased capacity in the airline industry and they could sell cheap seats much more cheaply. What's happened in finance is that the internet and technology has allowed us to produce funds much more cheaply. But the intermediaries do not have an interest in selling cheap, low-cost, simple products because they're financially incentivized to do something else. So we need to do what Freddie Laker did and break up the industry. Unfortunately, it cost him his business and his airline. The powers that be stopped him and put him out of business. We've learned from that, and now I think Steve was absolutely right that we need to just try and replicate what Freddie did, but without someone going out of business.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you very much indeed for your hard-hitting points. Seetal, I think we're going to go back to you for up to a minute, unless you've already covered your BSI point. I think you might have done it earlier. Seetal, do you wish to speak now? You're on mute, Sita.
Hi. Yes. Yes, I've covered my BSI point, but there's just two things that I would say that have been very important to me hearing what we've done today. I'm very proud of the Transparency Task Force and what we've achieved in the pension scams arena. Within the BSI steering group on sustainable finance, as I've mentioned, the Transparency Task Force and myself have been asked to now continue with a suite of different standards, equities, bonds, and so on. The 2 points that resonate with me are, number one, incentives, which is something that I brought up at the I think it's about the third meeting that we had 19 months ago. So I was actually told, Tal, but how can we do this? How can we tell people what to do? And I was like, well, we're the steering group. We're the steering group, the whole of Britain. If we don't tell people what to do, who is going to tell them? So this was the argument that I was putting forward, that everyone should be incentivized, from the cleaner to the CEO, in terms of being sustainable, in terms of doing the right thing. And actually, everyone agreed with me in the end, and we got that through. So rather than we have to push boundaries and try and make everyone responsible for what they do. And number two, there's a point made about ethical investing from the top. Well, the work that I do obviously is environment, social, responsible, governance, ethical. Again, it is really important that we get ethical training and do the right thing morally. Even though that a lot of us know what we should do or don't do is right or wrong in our hearts, we need to educate people and just spread the word.
Thank you, Cital. Passionate as always. Really love to hear from you. Thank you, Cital. Our last 1 minute round is going to Mr. Ian Hart. I'm looking forward to hear what Ian has to say. Ian, please make your point. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invite, Andy, and it's good to see you, Diane, as well. I'm a little bit confused on what the objective of the FCA's, what he's trying to achieve. I was very impressed with Mike Stafford's analysis of some of those questions. If they're sending out 39 questions and asking stupid questions like that, I'm not quite sure what they're trying to achieve. I'm looking at an article in Money Marketing, which is what I thought it was after. And if I can summarize it by saying here is, what more can we do to help the market offer a range of products that meet straightforward investment needs? Now, what I took that to mean, what is focusing on the people who can't get access to advice. My understanding is from FCA research that around about 6% of the public use an IFA, i.e. 94% do not. 50% have savings of less than 5k. Now, is the objective of this research to help those? Or is it to attack the IFA community, which are really we are always being attacked? Now, if you're trying to help the people who have got very little try to achieve something with their aspirations, then I feel there's roughly around about 300 billion in cash ISAs. Now, with inflation approximately 0.5%, and the Bank of England base rates probably not rising for a decade, the public will struggle not to lose money in these products. These are the people who want help, I believe. I would assume, listening to Steve's points earlier, that the banks look after the majority of the cash ISAs, and therefore they are a key conduit. I'd also assume that opening a cash ISA is relatively easy, much easier than a stocks and shares ISA. So banks have experimented with providing financial advice over the years, but have struggled. It seems to me there is a need to help the public grow their savings with a product that has low volatility. Instead of lending the money to institutions like banks for little return, open their eyes to lending to corporates like Marks and Sparks by investing in fixed income. Over the last decade, the market has created a strategic bond sector and has delivered returns in the single digits with low vol. The challenge is to provide sufficient information to the public so they can understand what they can invest into and make it easy. Allow maybe the scope of the cash ISA to hold fixed income or something like that. Now that is what I assumed that's what the FCA was trying to achieve. If it's trying to hit the IFA community, they're missing the mark.
Thank you very much, Ian. It's great to have you with us. It's been quite a long time, sir. Lovely to see you. Okay, folks, we're going to bring things to a close formally, but those of you who are regulars will know that between now and 1:30, we'll have what we call our fireside chat, which is basically where we go into free fall, and we just let the conversation go for those that want to carry on chatting away. Sometimes it turns out to be particularly interesting, actually, when we kind of go into unstructured conversation. So what I'd like to do now, please, is invite everybody to thank all of the speakers, including the 1 minute round speakers, and frankly, thank ourselves for spending some time together, once again focusing on a matter that's of great importance. How are we going to help get this financial sector sorted out? Let's make sure that we use the opportunity given to us to respond to the consultation. Please do let me know if you want to be part of that response squad. It's a great team effort, lots of camaraderie, a great chance to get your thoughts heard. So, you know what we're going to do? We're going to wave to say thank you and to formally close the session. But for those that want to hang around, I'm expecting most of you to go, but for those of you that want to hang around till up to 1:30, we'll keep the channel open. So thank you all very much indeed.